Hello and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. It's so great to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got a question for you. Have you tried all the things when it comes to dealing with your dog's reactive behaviors, but you're still struggling and feeling at your wit's end? Or do you just know that there's a deeper way to connect with your dog and you're curious about how to make that happen? Then you are definitely going to love today's episode. I spoke with Caroline Griffith, an author, speaker, lecturer, qualified nutritional therapist, and founder of Canine Flow, who has been working in the pet industry for more than 28 years. She is phenomenal, and I'm proud to call her my own teacher, mentor, and friend. Caroline's take on all things dogs is so refreshing because she brings the heart back into focus, both your dog's and your own. I stumbled across Caroline's work when I was looking for an alternative to traditional training techniques when Lucky was a puppy. I actually Googled spiritual dog training and came across her work. I'm going to invite her to speak in another episode about her perspectives and experience in the pet food and nutrition space, but today we're going to focus on her incredible work with Canine Flow. Canine Flow is more than just a modality to work on your dog's behavior. It's a way of being with your dog that invites you to understand your dog, and again yourself, from an energetic and emotional space. This isn't woo-woo. There is definitely science behind the assertion that the heart is an electromagnetic organ that drives the way that we experience and engage with the world around us. And the exact same thing is true for our dogs. As Caroline talks about in this episode, she feels that the missing part of the equation when it comes to dogs and what happens to be their lesson for us as humans is to unite the mind and the heart in coherence. When we support our dogs in grounding their emotional charge, they become calm and happy, and the very behaviors that we've been trying to change start to be a non-factor. We talk about what Canine Flow is and what it isn't, how it complements traditional positive reinforcement techniques, as well as how our dogs are inviting us to step into our own heart space. Caroline also shares her experience of connecting to the canine consciousness that she refers to as the sacred canine heart, and she graciously does a reading for all of us with her sacred canine oracle deck. I also share some of my personal experiences as a student of Caroline's Canine Flow course that she'll be offering again in March, so you can hear my take on it and how it has supported Lucky and me. Stick with me until the outro because I'll also share with you 3 tips on how you can apply aspects of Canine Flow with your dog today. And a quick note before we get started, this episode is supported by Aspirationary, which, in full transparency, is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. You can check out our shadow work and moon magic journals and workbooks, as well as our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens on Instagram at Aspirationary, and that's spelled Aspirationery. Okay, grab a cup of tea or your leash and let's go. Hi, Caroline. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited that you're doing this Mystic Dog Mama podcast.
Oh,
I'm
thank
really
you.
pleased for you. I've been listening to the ones so far, and they're just great. The level of information, it is different to traditional canine podcasts that I've
Mm-hmm.
seen. And whilst there has been some really great podcasts that you've done so far on health, there's this element where it's a little bit beyond that and a little bit more about the soul, and that just fits so well into Canine Flow.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. And you're a big inspiration for what I'm doing with Mystic Dog Mama as well. So I'm very grateful to you. And I agree. I think the sort of impetus around Mystic Dog Mama is how do we bridge all of these different things that we have historically kind of separated, like health, like behavior, etc.,
Yeah.
and take a perspective, a much more spiritual perspective, which is one of unity and seeing everything as connected and going that little bit deeper to better understand both our
Mhm.
dogs and ourselves. And that's a big reason why I was really drawn to Canine Flow as well. I came across your work a few years ago with what I was sort of looking for different ways of engaging with Lucky that was beyond the kind of operant perspective on training and beyond just sort of obedience training that looks at changing the behavior by changing the dog's mind or by creating situations in which you're managing the behavior to force another behavior. And I just wondered if there wasn't a better way of going about it, if there wasn't a better way to engage with him and bond with him in a different way. And I actually Googled spiritual dog training. And obviously, yeah, I did.
I
Because I was like,
came up.
you did.
Yeah.
You came up. I was like, there's got to be. Please let there be. And then I was like, and there she is, my
Oh,
angel in
amazing. I love
ways.
that. I didn't
It
know
was,
that.
yeah, it was so perfect. And so I was so excited to learn that there was even this perspective about engaging with your dog from
Mhm.
the soul level. And so
Yeah.
then obviously, we've been in touch and I took the Canine Flow course, which I absolutely loved. And I wanted you to come on and share more about Canine Flow as a way of living with your dog
Hmm.
for the Mystic Dog Mama community. So I'm excited to get into it. Yay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yay.
And as you said, it is a way of living.
Mhm.
Because what I find with Canine Flow, even if you come at it initially from the perspective of what do we do in Canine Flow that's different, how can I implement those practices, you find that you have a transformation that reaches beyond just you and your dog's relationship then, and it has the potential to really change you and your life in a better way. So it becomes a lifestyle rather than just a set of practices that you might engage with to make changes with your dog's behavior. Um, Even if you do just sort of use them as practices that will change canine behavior, you'll suddenly start to notice things shifting in yourself, and you'll be like, okay, it's almost unavoidable that this magic that begins to seep into you and into your life the more you engage with the practices of Canine Flow.
Absolutely. So, do you think you could maybe share with the audience a little bit about what the premises of Canine Flow are and what that kind of looks like to you?
Okay, so we talk a lot about the heart and the power of the heart, and unifying the heart and the mind. So for us in Canine Flow, we don't subscribe to the three letters of mind, body, soul. We go just that step further. So if we were to see it as a kind of triangle, it would be mind, body, heart. And it's when you unify those three that you can really fully access your spiritual higher self and your soul. So the heart tends to get a raw deal and doesn't tend to get looked at as often. So in order to readdress that balance within Canine Flow, I talk about the heart a lot, and there's a lot of scientific papers now on the heart, and I don't just mean as a physical organ to our health, but as a measurable emotional um, set of frequencies within the heart. We can measure those frequencies. And the heart is almost seen now as like another little brain. It's often described as another brain, but in its own right, it has its own set of frequencies, its own set of capabilities. So when we link the mind and the heart and the body, all of those, that's for me where we really access our soul. So our dogs are very heart-based creatures. And I believe within the Canine Flow principles as well, that they are almost here with us, or we have attracted them to us to regain that heart space, because humanity has been very intellectually mind based for a long time. We really have focused on the mind for quite a long time. And there's no reason why we shouldn't focus on the mind, but we need to rebalance things and really be unifying the heart and the mind connection. So the mind is really useful to us, but we've overdeveloped that way of looking at things, and so naturally the other aspects of our life have been overdeveloped on the mind side of things. So when we think about dogs and dog training, it's think dog, it's neuro pathways, it's what's inside your dog's mind. I mean, these are titles that are probably actually titles of dog training books, you know, sort of how can we adapt and understand the dog from that thinking, intellectual, what we call intelligence point of view. And for me, when we unify the heart and the mind, we start to notice just how many choices are made through that heart-based center. The heart is 5,000 times more powerful electrically than the mind, and 100,000 times more powerful magnetically. I hope I've got that the right way around. Either way, it's you know, even if I said to you the heart is doubly as powerful as the mind, that's actually quite a big statement. But for it to be 5,000 and 100,000 times more powerful than the mind, we go, whoa, why have we not been looking at this? this organ inside us, this part of us, is so powerful in terms of the decisions and the choices that we make and the behaviors we make. And the dog has the biggest heart per body mass of any creature walking planet Earth. So they are even more heart-based, and they don't have this kind of overriding self-doubt or overriding wondering all the time of whether they've done the right thing, or thinking further about, you know, should I have done that earlier? They live in the moment. So they are so heart-based and so magnetic. And we've really been missing a trick by only focusing on their mind. You know, that they have an element of mind, which, quite frankly, we've nailed it. We have written so many books on that. I don't think we really need any more. And so we've nailed what we feel is our understanding of it. And yet we've still got all the same behavior problems that we have been trying to deal with for a long time. And what I find with Canine Flow, and what I found over the 15 years of developing it, is when you unify the heart and the mind, and you're really looking at how has the dog come to that decision on that behavior, or how has that dog taken part or made that choice, if you like. Because why I'm sort of stopping a bit is because they don't, but I don't believe that they're particularly making the choice then doing the behavior. It's like it sort of instinctively happens depending on what's happening with their heart energy. So but the way that we normally discuss things, it's like, how have they come to that choice of making that behavior? We've been just looking at one side of it. We haven't really looked properly at what is going on behind the scenes in terms of their heart. And it's vital. And when we see both sides, it gives us so many explanations, so many understandings, and a whole new way of working with them that shifts and transforms behavior. I've seen it happen time and time again. Dogs that haven't got on with other dogs, and you look at them from the Canine Flow point of view, and you shift that behavior. And it may have been there for a decade before. And, you know, you can't train a dog out of everything. It's this understanding of who is that dog underneath, and how can we encourage them to what I call be in the flow magnetically and emotionally.
Right.
And that makes a shift in their behavior. It's
Absolutely.
such a new way of working with dogs that even after 15 years to sort of, I think probably I'm over trying to kind of explain it from the mind point of view. It's something you have to really feel.
It
And when you
is.
do, you've done it, something clicks and you go, my goodness, where have I been?
Well, no, it's true. And I have to say that when I first went into Canine Flow, I had the sort of perspective and mentality that, like you're saying, is dominated by our mind focus as humans. And I sort of was thinking, oh, it's another modality. And like wanting to kind of box it in that you would and then apply it in a certain way, when in reality it's not a modality like that. It really is about fundamentally changing your worldview on how you're thinking about engaging your dogs. And yes, there are techniques that are part of it that you can use, but that's not the focus. The focus is really, how do you see your dogs in another light? And one of the things that I found so interesting on the student side of things with Canine Flow was how you talk about charge about energetic and emotional charge in the dog's body and understanding that better in relation to what we are seeing on the outside in terms of behaviors. And I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about charge with that.
So what we call charge in Canine Flow is it's like an emotional charge. It could be any emotion. You don't even really need to know what the emotion is. And this is like a build up because the dog has not been able to express themselves emotionally. So we get this too as people. I've had people that have come on my retreats before and they've gone home and picked up the guitar again for the first time in years because there was a block on their creative flow. Or there was an emotion related to the block on the creative flow that they have been able to let go of or readdress, and it's meant that they can then their creativity can flow and they can pick up that guitar. So the dog wouldn't necessarily want to play a musical instrument, but the dog would want to do activities that ground their emotions. And people do say that when they're playing the guitar, they're grounding their emotions. You know, a lot of songs are written as an emotional grounding tool. So we would choose often quite intricate ways. We don't always choose intricate ways, like just hugging our friend is grounding our emotions. And we all knew when we were told not to hug our friends how wrong that felt. And that, you know, you sort of went up to your friend and you felt this, what I would call that, a charge of emotion that you wanted to ground. And so dogs are looking all the time to ground this emotion. And they have their set canid ways of doing this. And often we as humans don't necessarily want them to do the canid ways of grounding. So we would put measures into place, even without meaning to, that would restrict their ability to ground their emotions. So dogs end up with these charges of emotion that then are expressed when they do get out in the big wide world in the best way that they can. So years gone by, when dogs weren't necessarily kept in the households that we keep them in now, which I think have got all, I'm not saying all households, but they've kind of got, there's more people, there's more households, there's more going on all the time, getting smaller and smaller, this world that the dog's in. Years gone by, dogs would sort of potter around, you know, the old story about the dog that went round the street and got the sausages from the butchers and all this kind of thing, and met Mrs. Jones here, who would pat him, and then he would go to, you know, Mrs. Smith's at that end of the street, and, you know, that dog was able to potter about and ground emotions, pick things up with its mouth, to maybe dig if it wanted to really sniff at loads of different things and really take part and interact in the world. And that's one of the ways that our dogs really ground themselves. I mean, we do this at home, you know, that when you just have a couple of hours and you just potter about and you might do a bit of dusting, you might tidy a pile of papers, you might, you know, just make a cup of tea and potter about. We even call it that. And we feel so much better for it. And we've really not done a great deal, but we have
Right.
really emotionally grounded, which is so wonderful. And it brings contentment. And this is what I think our dogs aren't having when they've got a charge. They're not in contentment. So what I tend to say is, if you're looking at a dog, and I mean, it's especially apparent if you are using the term the dog wants to be in charge. So if at any time you think the dog wants to be in charge, we in Canine Flow would say that's because they have a charge. So they're not wanting to be in charge. They have a charge that they want to express, or that they're looking to express in some way, or they need to express because it is that strong. But it doesn't even have to be these huge behaviors that we would necessarily say are then, in the previous ways of looking at things, potentially their dominant behaviors. It can be in just subtle behaviors. So a dog that wants to sniff more on a particular walk that day, and the guardian is maybe in a bit of a hurry, or the guardian's just not used to that, even if they're not in a hurry, they might be moving the dog on a bit quicker. And the dog really has more emotion to charge. So they will come home from their walk and they will have only really grounded 60, 70% of their charge. So the dog's then left with this charge within them. So what do they do with this? How do they ground this? How do they express this charge? So they are very connected with their guardian. So they might look for their shoe to chew, or they might look for something that really has that resonance of the guardian, because they like to emotionally ground onto the owner. So if the owner isn't available, they will choose something that represents the owner, something that has this frequency and this emotion imprinted in it, which shoes and socks usually do. So it's all about understanding how the dog goes to ground this emotional charge. And we're not used to looking for this. We're not used to looking for this at all. So most of the behaviors that dogs do, we will look at it from a choice-based point of view in the mind. And we might have management techniques for those behaviors, as you mentioned before, which can sometimes be compassionate management techniques that are great at the time. We need them at the time, often for humanity's safety, for the dog's safety, for our own safety, or just because that's how we want to teach the dog to sort of live with us in our particular household. If they're compassionate, that's great, but we do need to then be very aware that if we've relied on our compassionate management techniques, and that's meant that the dog couldn't emotionally ground, when do we give them opportunities to emotionally ground? We need to build that into the framework as well. Otherwise, if we don't, and even if it doesn't come out as a behavior, that emotional charge will be in the body and it will manifest as an ailment. So it's either going to be an ailment or it's going to be a behavior.
Right. Well, we see that with humans too. We totally see that.
We do, but we see this in hindsight.
Right? That's very
We
true.
don't necessarily see this before. And so what Canine Flow is sort of encouraging is a different way of looking at your dog. So you put it perfectly, really. And it's not only a different way of looking at your dog, but it then influences how you look at yourself and the way you emotionally ground. And then that changes things completely. And you go on to really, by sharing Canine Flow as well, once you understand it, by sharing Canine Flow, you go on to support the whole of humanity to ground emotionally, which is just so what we need. We really need this as a species on this lovely planet Earth.
100%. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think what's interesting too, as you're talking about charge and giving dogs the opportunity to ground that, there's a really fine line where I think we have put the mind onto this, where we think about charge in terms of the dog's energy, like they just need to run more, for example, like they need to burn it off. I see this mentioned quite a lot in various training circles of like exercising your dog like to get rid of excess energy. But really what you're talking about is this emotional energy that sometimes exercise can help with that. But I've noticed, to give an example, is I take Lucky on his walks, and I'm very conscious, and even more conscious after doing Canine Flow, of making sure that I am giving him appropriate opportunities to ground in the various ways that he wants to do that. And that looks different every day. And so it's asking me to be very present to what does he need today. And so that might look like sniffing a lot. Lately, it's been he wants to sit at every single bench he finds and just be. Just be. And so I need to check when I'm like, well, no, we've really got to get back, or we should, we need to get some exercise in, or any of the other things that I may be carrying around, and check that within myself and give him those opportunities. And even when I've given him plenty of opportunities, he's not necessarily fully grounded himself while we're out on the walk. And one of the things that I see him do quite often is we'll come in and I'll close the front gate and take off his leash and his harness. And he runs for a toy, and he runs up to me and he smacks me on my legs with his paws. So he's putting his paws on me, and then he's running back and forth. And some people could say, oh, it's because he needs to burn off that energy from an exercise perspective. But I totally feel that it's about him releasing this emotional energy. And he does it for like 30 seconds. Right? It's not a very long time. And then he's totally satisfied, and he walks into the house and he's like, okay, ready for the next thing. And
Yeah.
both facilitating those opportunities for him, as well as reframing for myself, has made it so much easier to make sure that I am providing him with as many different types of opportunities during the day to ground his energy, and seeing such a difference in his behavior as the
Yeah.
consequence of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Emotional enrichment is fantastic, but we do not, I don't think, do enough of it. It becomes a sort of a distraction tool if we're busy sometimes, or for some canine guardians, it can be a daily thing that they make an effort with their dog, but they don't realize just quite how cool like that is going to be. Um, we need to do more of it because enrichment really needs reframing away from the mind. It it really is nothing to do with tiring the dog mentally. Like literally, when you do canine enrichment, you are not tiring the dog mentally. You are giving the dog an emotional grounding tool and they become content. That's why they're calm. You are not asking them to use their mind energy up. So if I gave a child some complex mathematical homework to do before he went to sleep, and, or the stress, there could be stress involved, like the pressure, you've really got to do something, or you've got to do something the day before. So your mind is over working this. There are three examples there. You will not sleep. You will not be content. It's the emotions that make you content. So if you can really ground your emotions, which is what we're asking the dog to do, then you sleep better. So using the mind, all that does is kickstart the mind to work more. It goes into overdrive. When a dog is playing with something with its paws, it is grounding its emotions with its paws. When a dog is sniffing, it's grounding its emotions with its nose, which are things they do in enrichment. So when a dog is ripping or tearing or chewing, which is what they do in canine enrichment and what they really should be doing anyway as part of their diet, but that's another podcast. When they're doing that, they're emotionally grounding and they're becoming content as a result. They have not used their brain to work out anything. They haven't. It's all to do with the emotional contentment. And an emotionally content dog is a calm dog. And that's what really we're looking for by providing this, what we call mental stimulation. It is, in fact, emotional stimulation. But I think this is something that humanity as a whole is being able to reframe at the moment. Because even when we discuss mental health for people in general, or for children, or for any age group, really, what we're really referring to is emotional health. And it's this understanding of, again, the unity between the heart and the mind, and understanding that connection that they have. And there are now many ways that or practices or ways that we can work as humans, which bring us out of the mind, which is what really we're trying to do, is come away from our mind to ground ourselves, be more heart-based, be more in the now, less in the mind, to be calmer. So we already know really deep down what it is, but it's this reframing of it. And as humanity changes, our ways of looking at dogs will change as well. And that has really been the case, because traditionally and historically, we are more compassionate now than we used to be with dogs. And I do believe that, generally speaking, humanity has become more compassionate, not less compassionate, although some people may disagree. I feel that we have. And that way has moved along with dog training as well. But also this notion of a hierarchy, that is crumbling now. That is. And we are now finding different ways to live with our dogs. Whether we understand it or not, we're becoming more in the flow with our dogs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I talked with our archaeologist, David Ian Howe, about the ways in which wolves developed into dogs co-evolving alongside us. And the focus was very much about that sense of co-evolution, that you cannot understand human history without understanding the history of dogs, and vice versa. And from the more esoteric perspective as well, where we talk about ideas of awakening, of heart-centered consciousness, that we are being called into this era of it, it makes total sense that our dogs are right there as heart-based beings with the biggest hearts of any
Mm,
creature, showing
yeah,
us how to do this and also crying out for the need for it, mirroring back to us that it's for our own good as well.
the dogs are already there.
Yeah.
They are already there, and we're catching up. But because we don't see, because we haven't got there yet, we can't really see what it's like to live as a heart based being that doesn't have these thoughts all the time. So it's really, really hard for us to really put ourselves in our dog's paws and really understand what it must be to go through life without having these constant past and future thoughts all the time. But the ancients did know this, and they would revere dogs in the way that the dog was the heart based being. The dog was able to read the heart. The dog was part of your transformational process. So the ancient Egyptians, obviously, with Anubis would weigh the heart. So he wasn't, even though he's depicted often as with black skin, so he looks a bit, with his pointy ears, could look a bit scary if you don't really understand what he's about. But he was actually a being that loved you and would weigh your heart. So it's not a sort of a judgment what you've done wrong, as is often depicted in some Egyptologist books. But he would weigh the heart, and he was like your friend when you got to that next stage. And the same, you're in Mexico, and I'm pretty sure the celebration of the dog is very similar to that, in the sense that the dog would actually be your guide just beyond death, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
your mutation to wherever you were going to go next. The dog would be part of that as a loving guide, for you to be able to know yourself, what it is that you had achieved emotionally in that life, and what you were going to move on to either take with you, or how you were going to be in your next life. So it's,
Absolutely.
yeah, they knew this. And then through the shifts and the changes that happened with humanity, and we lost that ancient way of looking at things, and now we're sort of almost doing this circle back to it, and the dogs are here, and they're like sticking themselves in front of as many people as possible in order to encourage us to open our hearts and just be that little bit more heart based. And we may not notice this at first, but for me, I see this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. And we've talked about before how we both have the belief that dogs choose their owners, that there is this, going back to the idea of like something magnetic, like it's not random that your dog has shown up in your life. They have
Mm,
shown up for a very important reason, and it's up to us to be open to seeing what that reason is. And it's often a much deeper thing than we initially think on the surface. And it's not so much about us doing the favor of taking care of the dog, that sense of like, oh, I've rescued the dog. I mean, I say this about Lucky all the time when people ask me, is he a rescue dog? And I'll say, yeah, but he's the rescuer. He really is the
yeah.
rescuer. Like he's the one doing, like he's doing all the hard work here. Like and I credit him for that, because it takes it also for me anyways, in framing it that way, it allows me to look at how do I best support and respect him as the sentient being that he is. So I agree that there is a need to help dogs, to teach them to steward them with how to live in this human world. But through my experiences with Lucky, and through my experience of doing Canine Flow, the perspective has changed so dramatically, where it's not even about training. It's not, I don't even have that perspective with him of how do I get him to do something, to behave a particular way. I teach him
Mm,
ways for his own safety and where it's important, where we've got to be social with other beings. But the focus is mostly on how do I allow him to be the fullest version that he is, which in turn allows me to be the fullest version of myself, or at least shows me where I'm blocking that within myself. So again, that mirroring back and forth. But I wondered if you could talk about sort of along those lines. What does it look like when someone is working with their dog? So understanding that a lot of people will come to something like Canine Flow because they've got an issue. There's they see it as an issue with their dog,
Yeah,
and they've
sometimes
tried other
that's,
things.
yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
I think also, and this is where certainly in terms of sort of me in my mind based wanting to get Canine Flow out there and sort of trying to learn entrepreneurship and marketing and all that kind of crazy way. It's people come to Canine Flow because something goes, yes, goodness, how did I not see that before? Deep down, we are all heart-based beings. We really have overdeveloped the mind, but we have that knowing. So I think it starts to happen automatically when you get a dog. Now, this, what you're sort of talking about in terms of, we have to teach them something. In a sense, we do. But I find when the dog is emotionally grounded, and the dog is what I call in the flow, then, and then is allowed to continue to be in the flow because the guardian can see that they're a magnetic being that is just trying to express energy when they pull them over to that side of the road just to sniff something, rather than sort of pulling them back and worrying, and that they're allowing them to go over and complete that so that it grounds. When you've got a dog that is in that emotional flow, they don't do or show or behave in the way that we feel needs changing. So we almost relax more. That's one thing as well. So there's less frustration for us, more relaxation. They can sense that as well. And it isn't as direct as, oh, I relax, my dog relax. Like that to a degree will always happen, no matter, even if you're standing next to a person and you tense up, they'll wonder why. So that's too direct. It's way deeper than that. So if you are on a subconscious level quite grounded and relaxed, the dog will pick that up as well, but you might not even realize that you are. So we don't really necessarily find when the dog is in the flow that we particularly do need to teach them how to live in our world, because they just get it and they just flow through as part of our reality and our life. We don't necessarily meet something outside of our house, for instance, or on our walk that is a scary thing, or is something that the dog has to react to, or is something that the dog becomes reactive to because they don't have that charge. So we're not then walking away thinking, I need to find an answer to their charge, or I need to find an answer to their behavior problem.
That makes
So
sense.
it's a different way of being. And what can be what's interesting is that when you're so in the framework that you need to change the dog, you find it hard to see how it could be in that world where there's that flowing relationship between you and the dog is flowing with the rest of nature and grounding, and this energy ping pong is happening, and that they're grounded beings and they're not necessarily reactive. Because I've got to that stage with my dog, and she hasn't always been at that stage, but she is at that stage now. And it's not through management techniques. But I thought this today, actually, because we wandered out and there was a lovely, most beautiful ginger and white fluffy cat. And it was just sitting there, and Fusa hadn't noticed. And I thought to myself, because historically she's been a cat chaser, except for the cats that lived with us.
Oh, that's
Because
interesting.
I say to her, these are our cat. This is our cat. This is our friend. And I would just make a fuss of the cat, and she would be like, okay, they'd be asleep on the veranda together, like in no time. But every other cat outside, whether they were running or not. But she just sort of looked at this, oh, it's the cat, and carried on. And the cat was just like, the cat was me then, because the cat was looking at her absolutely amazed. Are you actually a dog? Like, it was quite funny. It was really interesting. But I think also she'd had a calm morning. She'd had her laser pain relief because she's a three-legged dog, my dog. So she'd had that, and she didn't really have a charge. She also hadn't had any food that would have biochemically interacted and left her with any charge as well, because that can happen. That happens a lot, whether we call it blood sugar levels, whether it's a different nutrient deficiency, whatever might be happening there. Food influences their charge a lot, which you learn about in Canine Flow, because I'm also a qualified canine nutritionist, formulate for different pet food brands. So we work with that in Canine Flow as well. But that's like one part of the puzzle, like a super interesting part, but it's not the whole picture. So I think there was a lot of elements that made up why it is that she didn't have a charge to even be worried about this cat that was sitting and wandering around on the wall nearby. Whereas on a different day, she may have had more of a charge and she might have gone up to the cat. She's not chasing anymore, but historically, years gone by, she had more of a charge. She probably would have just chased immediately or wanted to. Because obviously, if we restrict them on the end of the lead, they never get to ground. So yeah, it's interesting. Now, the grounding doesn't necessarily have to be a scary thing. The grounding is often they just need to get to that thing and ground that charge. You know, like if you go into a clothes store and you see the most lovely jacket at the end and you go, oh my God, I really must have to go. You know what it's like? You feel like you need to ground on it. You can't just see it. You need to actually hold this thing and feel it. And you can't not do that. You go towards the back of the store and someone takes the last one off the shelf and you're just like, oh, I didn't even get to touch it. And you almost, me being me, I probably would say, can I just like look at that? And, you know, like you feel that is a charge. Do you see what I mean? Like,
yes,
that's an emotional charge. And obviously, we have different ways of dealing with these things and different levels of coping abilities and resilience to having that charge, you know? And it depends on the situation as well and how much that actually mattered to us. You know, if that jacket is just, oh, well, I got loads of jackets, I don't need one really. If that jacket really reminded us of a relative that we'd recently lost and we were going through grief, like we would even more want to touch that jacket. Do you see what I mean? So the charge is dependent on so many different factors. But if we can get this in our dogs as well, can reduce these charges. So we're looking at all the time, what are the things that could be making up charge in our dog and ourselves? How resilient to charge itself is that physical being, or am I, you know, as a human guardian to the dog? And then what opportunities have we got to release that charge? You know, because if you weren't very resilient to charge, you might have a bit of a meltdown. The person would go out the store with the jacket and you might be upset that you never got to even touch the thing that reminded you of your lost relative. And it sounds so crazy. This story might seem a bit elaborate. Hopefully it's making sense to people, but how it relates to behavior. But it's all about this. What do we do with this charge? And when you touch something, that is a grounding activity. I can't tell you how much it is. Our body needs to have these opportunities. So it's like enrichment for ourselves, and the same with the dogs. So then that whole situation becomes an enrichment activity in that sense as well, if we can understand it like that. So really, this whole thing of understanding about energy within a dog, it's not even woo-woo either, because the heart has a measurable charge. The Institute of Heart Math have published many documents on this, many studies on this, many research papers. They've been doing this a long time, and they can measure emotion coming from the heart, and the changes of frequency when we feel different feelings gives different emotions, gives different frequencies. So the measurements are different depending on if we're feeling grief, we might be feeling gratitude, we might be feeling sadness, we might be feeling happiness and joy, we might be feeling love. You get a different reading, and these are measured, and you get numbers, you know, at the end of it. So these frequencies, a little bit like sound frequencies, they're different and they're measurable, and because they're measurable and they're definitely there, we can feel them, our dogs can feel them. And there's like a tangibleness to these emotions, you know, they're a thing, and they need to flow and be grounded and complete themselves.
Right. Right. No, that makes total sense. It makes total sense. It's also making me think about sort of from a physiological perspective as well, like the relationship with our nervous system with us, where and sort of looking at the dog from that perspective as well. That when you're talking about grounding through touching, I was also thinking about things like how when you're feeling upset, for example, like a really heavy blanket helps to give some sort of comfort because our
Mm.
bodies and consequently our nervous system loves that feeling of a bit of pressure, for example. And it made me think about one of the things that you taught us in Canine Flow when a dog is going at a charge. So, for example, something I do with Lucky is when he's seeing things go past the gate that he wants to kind of
Mm.
bark at, actually using the fact that he's trying to press his body at something,
Yeah.
into something to ground, which to me is similar to how I like the blanket on me. There's a pressing kind of, and it's not so much about the there is a physicality to it, but it's more like trying to get that charge out, that we as the owners can actually facilitate that by putting our hand. In his case, because he's little, I can put my hand on his whole chest area and allow him to pass the charge onto me that I'm grounding then for him, completing that sort of circuit,
Yeah.
that loop that you're talking about with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That particularly works if you're very close to the dog that you're working with, because the dog is quite confident to give you their emotion. If you don't always know the dog very well, they may be a bit apprehensive to really connect with
Mm.
you, in any way, let alone that way. But yeah, definitely, there's practices and techniques in Canine Flow where you can encourage the dog to, in a sense, push into you and allow that grounding to happen. And yeah, that it is, I guess, similar from the awareness point of view of the body, but you're really accepting a magnetism of push forward. Whereas when you have your blanket around you, that's very similar, because I did my talent and T-touch as well up to P2. And that's very similar to what we would use in the T-touch called a body wrap, where you're bringing awareness to the body of its holding patterns and its tension patterns and its habits. So it's almost like when you put that blanket around you, I guess it's giving you that kind of sense of safety in a way, and might even encourage you to then relax,
Right. Right. And I think
which is
Canine Flow takes it that
slightly
step
different.
further, where it's
Yeah, well, I kind of think it does as well, but that's mainly because I went on the journey of doing the T-touch and up to the P2, and then I continued to understand dogs from an energy flow perspective, and it's led me to Canine Flow. I was running retreats because I wanted to go on a retreat with dogs and guardians where we focused on energy stuff, really. And yeah, couldn't find one at all. And I'd always worked in a kennels, and it was a relatively small kennels, and we used to integrate the dogs well. They had a play area and they would meet, and it wasn't like completely, I mean, talking a long time ago, probably couldn't do it now, the different laws in the UK. But yeah, they used to integrate, so I was used to seeing dogs, and I thought, you know what, I could run one. I've got stuff to teach, which wasn't called Canine Flow then. I thought, I've got stuff to teach. I can see dogs really well. I'm really good at reading dog body language, so nothing bad will happen on my watch. And I decided I'm going to do this. So I started running these retreats, and that was over 15 years ago. And they very quickly went from weekends to like 4 or 5 day experiences, and people from all over would come for these retreats. I even went actually over to the USA, Colorado, and ran one about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I did that as well. But mainly they've been in Wales, and I found this fantastic venue, which I still use to this day. But about probably 9, 10 years ago, somebody said to me on these, like, I want to do what you're doing. I want to know why my dog has transformed. Like, what are you actually doing that's different? Because this was a qualified dog trainer. So she was into all the compassionate methods, clicker training, left, right, and center, which is so much fun. Love clicker training. So she'd done loads of stuff, and she wanted to know what. And so I had to really think, okay, what am I doing differently? And a lot of it was always this voice in my head. It's about being differently. It's not about what you do, it's about how you be. But you almost need to teach people what to do to be different.
That's
So
right.
I needed to create this kind of way of working with dogs and these practices of working with dogs. So yeah, and it's developed into Canine Flow. Subsequently, that lady and many others have gone on to be practitioners. And what I encourage with practitioners is that because it becomes part of your life, you want to share it. You want to. Is it like I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh, you will share it," and you would like you just can't like you just think, "Where have I been?" Like I need to share this because it's so integrative as well. At no point does it say that mind-based compassionate dog training doesn't have a place, because it does. But when you practice the heart-based side of things as well and unify them together, it's like a whole different world. You don't need as much mind-based stuff. Of course you don't. You don't, because they generally don't do the behaviors that we'd be looking to shift and change anyway.
Yeah.
So, you're not sort of, but you can still have fun with them and you can still teach them to do stuff and you can teach them tricks, which is so much fun. And they learn them in no time because they're really in the flow,
That's
really in the
right.
flow. They don't have any charge that's distracting them.
Yeah.
They're grounded, ready to learn, ready to rock and roll. What are we learning today? And it's a totally different relationship that you have. So yeah, generally speaking, people that learn Canine Flow, they want to share it, and then it becomes a hobby income. And how cool's that? Like I think, goodness me, like how lucky are you to my practitioners? They are running these lovely either afternoons or day little mini retreats that people go on with their dog. They get to meet people and their dogs. They get to share really cool stuff. They make friends and meet people in their area that they didn't even know were there and were awake or were spiritual. And every time you teach, you're learning. So you are growing and transforming even more and becoming even more unified in your mind, body, soul, and
Right.
heart.
I mean, what more could you want? What more
I
could you
know. It's
want?
like yeah. It sounds like it is really cool. It is
It
really
is.
cool. And for some people, they then also put together like uh, consultations. Sorry, the word escaped me for a minute. So they will go to see canine guardians and their dogs, and they will work with them consultation wise. But it depends on the practitioner and what they want to do. Some of them want to do that. Some of them just want to like run the classes, or it
Yeah.
can be kind of and some people just want to learn it to transform their life and be with their dogs in a different way. And it so supports the move that we are having and the shift that we are having with humanity as a whole, to look at dogs in this way. It makes no sense to me, really. It's like we're holding ourselves back by still seeing the dog as a purely mind-based, thought-based. We need to mentally tire them out. We need to understand their neuro pathways, all that kind of thing. We're kind of holding ourselves back because we live with these dogs all the time. We're with them all the time. So we have this
Absolutely.
opportunity to really make shifts, and they're right there with us. They're so magnetic. They teach us how we can be more magnetic and how we can attract more into our lives of the things that we would like to see and
Yeah,
not the things we're not so keen on.
I was gonna say as well, like how we're attracting all the time, so it's doing it more deliberately, more intentionally. But something I think it would be interesting if you're willing to share some of the examples that you shared with us in the course as well of how you saw not really, I mean, it's for the lack of a better term, like success stories, where you saw some real transformations with how Canine Flow helped certain dogs. I'm thinking of like Stewie, for example, dogs that had had some pretty difficult situations that other things weren't necessarily really getting them to that point, and then Canine Flow opened things up for them and for the people working with them.
Yeah. So yes, Stewie, who the Guardian changed his name afterwards because he transformed so much. He just didn't even suit his old name. It was quite interesting. So yeah, we worked with him, and what I think he kind of he came into, so the Guardian was running a shelter, and he was taken in, and he hadn't, I think it was 3 years, he hadn't really been out of a cabin, like he'd had it, like it, except to sort of toilet, he'd lived in like a cabin. And so he had a lot going on for him physically as well. But I went to him, and we use the Fibonacci spiral in Canine Flow because we see spirals as a way to create transformation. And so we will almost paint in the air a Fibonacci spirals, which might sound a bit crazy, but it's, these, when you're visualizing it as well, these Fibonacci, this shape is what everything grows and changes and transforms as. So we use this, and I was essentially using the Fibonacci all around him, and I'd said to him, I'm not going to touch you, because his thing was he didn't like being touched. Like, it was super hard for them to even get him to go on a walk and have a lead on him, because he didn't want that. He wasn't comfortable with that level of closeness. So I'd said I wasn't going to touch him, and I didn't throughout the whole session. And you can see this, actually, this entire session is on YouTube. It's not on my channel, I don't think. It's on the channel of the lady who ran the shelter, but it's on my watch list if you go to Love, Wolf and Wonder.
I'll leave a link.
Trainer. Yeah, so anyway, you can watch it. And he's moving around and giving me the body parts that aren't grounded. He's literally giving me the areas to work on by the end of it. And I could have touched him very, very easily. He had completely relaxed. But what really was the biggest shift, and is part of this as well, because it isn't just about the dog, he had really appeared in that lady's life to support her to shift into a new way of understanding, because she had, as many of us do, especially when we're very busy people, she had not recognized her heart-based spiritual self as much as she could have done. And by him coming into her life, her feminine side came out a bit more, and she was able to notice the spiritual side of herself more. And as I'm aware, she's learning different things about the energy side of things now, whereas she wouldn't necessarily have looked at that before. So that's a really wonderful thing. And later on, there was another of these dogs, because there's a particular breed, and they were he was in the same shelter, and one of our practitioners, Dawn, went to do some canine hypnotherapy and spirals on this other dog. So yeah, we were able to support another dog as well, a little bit further down the line. So yeah, he was really interesting. I always find it really difficult to think of examples, because it's not so much about the dog went from A to B and was completely transformed. It's like a journey that the guardian and the dog go on together, and often the guardian shift is bigger than the dog shift, because the dog actually didn't need to change that much. I mean, obviously, we've had dogs that didn't get on with other dogs. We've been able to really support them to then, by the end of the retreat, really be integrating with other dogs. But it is still about the guardian being able to take those lessons home, those changes home, and continue to transform, which for the majority they do. And then I might see them or hear from them years later, and they say, wow, if I hadn't started on that journey, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. So it's like doors opening, and it's like the heart opening. That's what it is like. And you go, wow, like where have I been? Why haven't I been recognizing this aspect of me? It's been inside me all this time.
No, absolutely. And I can share
ideas.
No, yeah. But I can share an example too of an experience that I had as a student in the Canine Flow course with Lucky, that was around the canine hypnotherapy. And I talk to people about this all the time, because I'm amazed at the way that it has had an impact both on him and on me. And from that perspective too, of it's not about changing his mind. So when I'm sharing this story, it's not that I was trying to convince Lucky to be a different way. The intention was more that I became more aware of how he was feeling and responding in different situations, and to help put him at ease and put myself at ease in those same situations. So, for example, when we were taught canine hypnotherapy within the course and we wrote a script that was tailored towards our dog, I started thinking about what would I like to support Lucky with. And I've mentioned this before, and I'll use the term even though I think it needs redefining, like Laura Donaldson talks about. Lucky can be a reactive dog when we are out and about, and he can react to other dogs. He can react to bikes going by. He can react to people stopping and talking to us. And it can appear as like a burst of aggression, is
Is
what it
that
looks
charge
like. It's the charge. It's exactly that.
bursting through? Yeah.
Exactly. And so I decided what I wanted to do with the process of hypnotherapy was to help him and myself, because I recognize that as a result of him displaying these behaviors, I have tensed up. I've become frightened. I've become the reactive dog guardian, where I'm the one looking around, like, where is there a possible trigger, using that language, ahead of time, and therefore sort of placing that on the situation that we're in, right? I'm expecting something bad is going to happen. So through this process, I was aware again that this wasn't about changing him, but how do we make both of us more comfortable in these circumstances? And so I wrote the script where I turned everything that he would seem to aggress at into a very positive thing that he enjoys and wants to experience. And I told him how I could facilitate him having that experience. So, for example, in the script I was talking about, you love that there are different people. You love to sit and watch people at the bench, or you love the fact that there are all of these dogs that are around because you love to go and sniff where they've been. And I'm helping you to go over and sniff them safely. And if there's ever a situation where you're worried, all you need to do is turn around to me and I will pick you up and you can stay calm. And I did, as part of the course, we had to do a recording. And I remember you saying to me, Caroline, that it looked like I had like drugged Lucky. He was just so zonked out for it. I chose a time where he was already relaxed and open to it. But to give an example of how this works, the very next day I had to take him to the vet to have his nails cut because it's a traumatic experience, me trying to do it. But so is taking him to the vet, where he has quite literal panic attacks, like really heavy panting. He's really frightened. It's a really traumatic experience. And he knows exactly when we turn down a certain street, that's it. And that's usually when it starts. So I was sort of anticipating this is going to be the normal experience. We turned and he knew exactly where we were going, and he was a little bit worried, but he didn't start the heavy panting. He didn't start the panic attack. I was like, okay. We go into the vet's office and she takes him and just cuts his nails. There's no fuss going on. Normally he will show teeth. He will snap. I mean, he does not like it whatsoever. And she says to me, she turns around to me and literally says to me, "What did you do to him? He's a different dog." And I said, "Well, you might laugh at this, but I did hypnotherapy on him as part of a course that I'm doing, but I'm doing all this other work with him."
Yeah.
And she just said, "Keep doing it." And I've seen that there is this sort of generalization, for lack of a better term, that he's also happier on walks, and he's also trusting. He looks at me like, if a dog has walked past and he's not gone after it in the sort of through the sort of reactive behaviors, he looks at me as if to say to me, "Can I go and sniff it now?" And I say yes, and we walk on over and he can go and sniff where the dog's been, and then he's happy. So he's completed that circuit, like you're saying. But he's taken that sense of calm and trust in me, and therefore I have trust in him as well, beyond just the walk situation that I did the hypnotherapy for. I focused the script
Yeah.
on. And it's more this sort of generalized experience for him, where he is, I think ultimately what's happening is he's more trusting that I'm going to allow him to complete the circuits as best as possible.
Yes, yeah, and to release that charge. So
Hmm.
he went into the vets, you see, with less of a charge, and went into the car in the first place with less of a charge, let alone knowing where he was, he still had less of a charge.
Right.
So his self, that middle section, his self was better able to cope when the charge arrived.
Yeah.
When the thing that could create this charge arrived, he was better
Yeah.
able to then cope with that because of what you'd done before. And it's interesting with the hypnotherapy because the way really what's happening is this huge acceptance of them. And it's that energy shift that makes the biggest change. Them feeling that you accept them, because it's all very, like we can say mentally we accept them, but creating that story around it as well is
Hmm.
quite interesting. And that they feel safe, really letting them know they can come to you and that they feel safe and you accept them. But you're also, depending on how um, focused you are when you're doing that, you're almost creating that parallel reality that we were talking about before in a different conversation, that you're creating this, describing this in such detail, this parallel reality where that doesn't happen,
That's right.
that you are then putting into your framework of life and your frequencies of life. And that is something to be said for that as well. I think that's quite
Absolutely.
powerful, which is
Absolutely.
happening when we're doing the canine hypnotherapy. But it's interesting that the professional canine hypnotherapy is such a big part of Canine Flow, because traditionally hypnotherapy has been seen as something that we do to the mind. but but in Canine Flow, we're not at all. It's, I mean, they understand the tone of voice, of course they do, and there will be certain words that they understand in all languages, but there's a deeper meaning behind it.
That's right.
And reframing the behavior is a big part of understanding why
Hmm.
they're doing the behavior in the first place, so that we don't go into the professional canine hypnotherapy to limit them or stop them doing something. It's actually kind of the opposite in a way.
Very much so. Very much so. And I agree. We were talking before we started recording about ideas like the law of assumption, that sort of an idea of every possibility already exists in the great now moment. And what we end up experiencing in our kind of 3D everyday mundane lives is whatever we're putting our focus on. And so what doing something like the hypnotherapy within the context of changing my worldview and perspective on how I'm engaging with Lucky was more about also showing me where I put assumptions of what I think is going to happen that is usually with a negative bias, right? I'm anticipating he's going to behave in a way that I don't want him to behave, and I'm anticipating the consequences of that and all, etc. And so in reframing, it asks me to look at where am I actually the cause of the problem that I'm labeling as a problem. So that's part of his teaching too.
I
There is
think
a
also, oh, go on, carry
no,
on.
no, no. I was just going to say there is the possibility from the law of assumption perspective that there are other ways of being and other outcomes that I can choose from it, that are not quote unquote negative. They're not. So I can choose what is it that I want to see? What's the kind of behavior I want to see from him? But more so, what is the kind of experience I want him to have? What does that look like? And put my focus on that.
Mm. Which is a huge part of creating our reality,
Hmm.
which we're capable of doing.
Hmm.
And we've almost well, we have very, not almost, we definitely have come away from that empowerment as a species, which we're stepping back into. We're definitely stepping back into. And our dogs are then, with this huge magnetic heart, they sort of power up what it is that we want to create. They're there for us. But when we consider that the dogs are where we want to be, we're doing all this kind of work on ourselves and we're looking to understand the dog and understand ourselves better, and we're trying to still the mind more, the dog wouldn't ever be questioning why they had created what they created or thinking about it as deeply as we are. So there's also lessons in not overthinking how we were at fault in some way, which is a huge shift and change that as a canine guardian you find yourself thrown into, like, am I a good enough dog owner? It's just
That's a huge, yep.
such a big thing. And we are, like, the dogs can already see that we're good enough. They're where we want to be, so it's this, like, there's an advert over here that says be more dog, and it's, I always, like, that comes up in my head, because the dog is not judging themselves in that way, that
Yeah.
they maybe created reality wrong. you know
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just get on with, at the time, what is it, like, where can I put my energy, where can I put my energy, where can I ground, where can I ground, where can I ground, where can I ground. And we kind of step out and think about where we could ground tomorrow, once we've done this thing, or once more people are watching us and we've got more of an audience, where can we ground. And it's like, actually, no, we just need to be teaching, we need to be sharing, we need to be offering our creativity, because that's how we ground. So
Right.
it's like, we need to be more dog and go, I'm just going to do this, I'm just going to share this, I'm going to share this, like, instead of this. And this is a lesson from the whole of the Sacred Canine Heart, which I'll mention for you in a moment. But the whole of the Sacred Canine Heart for humanity is, just leap in and share your creativity, and don't be worried that people aren't going to want it. Or it's not about that. It's not about saying, I need to have this perfect website, then I'll share my creativity. Because I just ran those retreats.
Mm-hmm.
I did not think, oh my God, who's going to come on the retreats? How much should I charge for the retreats? Like, I was just so excited about running those retreats. I just ran them. It was like a flow that needed to be grounded. And it just came out of me, and it tumbled out of me. And I just created these retreats, and they have just grown from there, and they've developed into this wonderful Canine Flow. So I couldn't back then have made a plan of 10 years time, I want to be teaching this fantastic way of being with dogs, that would shift people's life. Like, I hadn't a clue. Like, it was just at the time, in that moment, I needed to share this great idea I'd have of doing this. And so I did. And that's what's led me on. If I'd said at the time, wow, no, we didn't really even have proper websites, to be honest, back then. But if I'd said, wow, no, I need to have proper posters, I need to do this, and I need to have people book before I can even book the venue. And, like, that's where it all shifts into mind.
Right.
And there's an element of mind. I do believe there's an element of mind, but it is about unifying. And we are so overdeveloped mind. We're not using the heart in the way that we can do and have the empowerment to do. And yeah, so it's like this overthinking of, what did I do wrong to create my reality? That goes into the overthinking as well. It's
Totally.
like
Totally.
part of it, isn't it, really?
It
So
really is. It
pull
really
you a
is.
card.
Ooh, tell me
I
about
haven't
this. Tell me about
mentioned yet about the Sacred Canine Heart, which, well, I mean, I haven't explained that when I'd been teaching Canine Flow for, a good few years, really, labeled as Canine Flow, I realized that there was always something else there, that I was running my retreats, but there was like a higher force that, if I surrendered to, the retreats would run so much more easily than if I tried to organize and run them. And I've come to know that this almost set of guides for humanity, if you want, this kind of resonance, is called the Sacred Canine Heart, that I can connect to. And it's like the resonance of all dogs. So it isn't one individual dog. So you're not doing animal communication in the sense that, I would say to Lucky, how's Alexia today? Or
right.
what color bowl do you prefer to eating out of, or anything like that. It's the whole Sacred Canine Heart, like why dogs are with humanity and how we're interacting with them. So I ended up creating these oracle cards, Sacred Canine Heart cards, as a bit of a download, if anything. And funny enough, although I hadn't seen her properly for a good few years, the lady who originally had said to me, I want to do what you do, I want to know how you're changing the dogs, I'd met up with her. And just before seeing her, I'd kind of had these images of this card and this download that this is what I was going to do. And and I sat in a cafe in Wigan in the UK, of all places,
Oh my goodness.
in this lovely vegan cafe in Wigan, and we just knocked the cards out. Like the information was just coming through, and I was like, oh yeah, we need to do this, and and it wasn't me. It was like they were just so waiting. The sacred canine heart wanted to come through, and this is one way now that we can connect with them with these cards. So they're smaller than I imagined at the time. So maybe when I have them reprinted, I'll have them bigger. But everyone that I chat to on this kind of podcast gets to pick a card. So why don't you tell me whether you want this pack or this pack? So the one with the ring, the hand with the ring, or
the one without the ring?
Okay, so this is the side we're going for. Okay, so this is a message really for you from the sacred canine heart. So it's not from Lucky. It's not about Lucky. This is for you. Okay, so what have you got? Oh, looks a bit like Lucky. Funnily
It does
enough.
look like Lucky. What does it say on the top?
It says expectations, which is really interesting because you've been playing with this idea of assumptions, which are similar, very similar. Mm-hmm. Consider your beliefs, your judgments of shoulds and shouldn'ts. So I should or I shouldn't do something. So that's kind of exactly what we were just talking about.
That's exactly right. And how funny that it looks like Lucky too.
Actually, it does look a bit like Lucky.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. Oh, Lucky. It's the closest we could get to you.
I know.
So your shoulds and your shouldn't. So that they're beautiful cards. They have lots of sacred geometry symbols on them because the Fibonacci is the basis of sacred geometry and the basis of the toroidal flow of the heart as well. So it's really key. Like you learn about a lot when you do Canine Flow. It's not just all about like how can we work on our cute dogs. I wish it was. Wouldn't be so much to teach though. So 40, page 40. I'll read you out what it says because this will be
this is fun.
This will be for you, but I feel like it will be for everybody listening. Okay, so from the dogs. Through our life experiences, we all collect expectations. We build on cultural and societal beliefs from our own individual viewpoint, and we very early on make decisions on what should happen or how certain things in life should be. This is the illusion that we live in. This becomes us. It becomes our individual reality, yet it is an illusion. Our stories become so real, they become truths for us. What are your beliefs about life, about other people, about canine behaviour? Do you have ideas on how dogs should be, or if certain things are right and wrong, allowed or not allowed, good or bad? The canine heart is expressing purity, peace, and they are the base. The canine heart shares that they always aim to harmonise, that they can move beyond our illusion, they act outside of our beliefs, that often our shoulds and shouldn'ts confuse them. They see us viewing them consistently as a certain type, a certain personality, or a certain label, when in truth they are all possibilities of dog. When they are given unconditional love, they feel able to express themselves. They feel understood and truly loved. This creates a feeling of safety and trust, and then the magic happens. Behaviours we want them to do become easier to assimilate, become easier to recognize, and growth beyond the illusion of belief occurs.
That's beautiful. And
that's go on.
So perfect for what we've been talking about.
I just was going to say, it's like, how do you describe Canine Flow in a couple of paragraphs? Page 40, everyone. 21.95.
Perfect.
I'm only joking. Keep that bit in. I don't mind. But yeah, the point is you can buy them from me if you really want them. I'd love you to have them. Like, I want them to go. I don't just want anyone to buy them, actually. I don't. I want them to go to people who will really understand what it means to connect to the sacred canine heart. I
Absolutely.
really do. That is what I would really value. Um, because they're not wrong, these cards. I have yet to pick one for anyone, even non-canine guardians, and it hasn't said something and they've gone, oh, that's a bit strange.
How'd you
They're
know?
uncannily correct. Yeah. How does the
Well,
sacred canine heart know? They are overseeing humanity, you know.
they are. Well, and again, it's that mirroring. And so,
Mm.
of course, it makes sense that you will be drawn to whatever card you need at that time to mirror it back to you. Absolutely. Can people get them from your website?
Yes, they can. The postage to the USA, it's written on there anyway about
Okay.
the postage, the
Okay.
postage details. Yeah, because it changed. It changed, so I had to make some changes. So yeah, people can. I can post them anywhere, really. They're only little.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Yeah.
And speaking of accessing anywhere, you have an online course coming up. Is that correct?
I
That people
do,
can sign up
yes.
for?
Yep. So I'm doing a guided version of my online course, and it will go on for 3 months, but you get lifetime access to the course. So the recordings will be sent to you after. So if you miss a lesson, that's totally fine. You can watch it on the recording. And yeah, you get the recordings and you can complete the course in your own time. If you want to, you can do that within the 3 months, but that's your call. You know, you might just want to absorb it all and really feel like you've integrated it and learnt it and then do the modules. There's questions at the end of each module, and really the main thing, as you know, because you did the course, is to sort of go off and try the practices and then record yourself maybe the second, third time you've tried them. Send that to me, and we chat about how you felt and what I can see is happening with the dog that you might not have noticed. Because often when we're trying the practices like canine hypnotherapy for the first few times, we're so busy trying to get the hypnotherapy right, we don't really always notice what the dog's doing. So just things like that, just so it's really nice to have that kind of ping pong of feedback, to what you're doing. So the
Exactly.
course is designed to learn the basics of canine flow, and you can take that then and work with friends and family's dog, work with your own dog. And then if you want to go on to share canine flow, and to spread the message of canine flow and the sacred canine hearts message, then you can become a practitioner. And that involves coming on the retreats. So you come to the retreat and you literally put into practice then the things that you've already learned on the level 1 online course. So you couldn't just jump into level 2. You couldn't just start practicing these things without actually learning why we're doing them and what it really means to be part of Canine Flow and the sacred canine heart and that way of being with dogs. And then we put things into practice, and then we really, really do talk bigger about canine flow on the retreats, because it is really a lot of this, and a lot of spiritual work is you can talk and talk and talk and talk, but you really have to do it, be it, do it, be it. You know, this whole thing of like, you really have to do the practice, do the work, be the
Absolutely.
practice, change yourself. You know, it's no good just talking about stuff that you could do and why you know,
Yeah.
that's part of it, but it's, you at some point do you have to integrate that into your life.
Absolutely. And I think to add on to that, I think it's really important and helpful to do that in community. So doing that with other people who are also doing that, your growth is
Yeah.
just exponential. It really
And
is.
also you get to meet loads of other dogs.
I know. That's the
So
best
much
part.
bigger dogs. And this is, I know, it's like the little girl in me still just loves dogs.
I know. It's so true, but I have to say too, it was really wonderful as a student on the course to be able to be in that set of people who are interested in this as well, and to hear people's different perspectives, and especially after we had gone away and done an exercise, and we come back and talk about that with one another. It was like,
Mm.
oh, I really struggled with this. What did I do? What was I thinking? And then, oh my gosh, that was so much easier than I thought. I didn't think my dog was going to respond like that, or how, because people are coming at it from different backgrounds, how they're using it in different contexts, where in our case, somebody was using it with rescue dogs, other people were using it
Mhm.
like in a grooming kind of context, other people doing it on their own dogs. So you get to hear how this can be applied in a number of contexts and what people's experiences were. So I think there's real value in doing the guided course and then in getting
Yes, it was
together for
fun.
these conversations.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was really, really good fun. And also that lovely lady that had been poorly and had missed at least two of the sessions, possibly more. So over a month's worth. And she'd listened to them on the recording and she'd done the spirals on herself. And when she came back, she said, I was so sick, really, really sick, could hardly breathe at times. And I'd been on this medication, I'd been on that medication. I'd just looked at herbal remedies, I'd looked at these different ways to support myself. I did some spirals around my lung area. She felt better the next day.
I know.
She was just like, we were all like, even I was gobsmacked. I was like, wow, like that's so cool. Okay, like I don't expect you to go and learn how to do them on the dog. Let's just say that you know how to do them. I was just so super pleased at the time that
Yeah.
she'd made that recovery. Yeah.
Well, and that's the gift too, that you're learning this perhaps kind of with the intention of using it on your dog. Your dog is inspiring you to learn it, but the
Mm-hmm.
reality is you are then able to, the real gift is you practicing it on yourself, whether it's the specific techniques or it's more changing that mindset. I mean, you get more out of it in many respects than your dog does. I mean, such a
Yeah, yeah,
gift.
because the dog's already there. But
Exactly.
the shift that we need, yeah. And but when we can see what's going on for the dog and we can really see them from the flow perspective, that's when we really realize why they're doing what they're doing,
Hmm.
and that actually the shifts will happen with us. It's not that there's something wrong with us, it's just that we're not as heart centered.
Right.
That's all
Right.
it is. We've just overdeveloped our mind, and we did that for a reason. We really felt that that was going to benefit us, and in many ways, it has. But it's not that there's something wrong with us because we are heart-based beings, really. But it's
Exactly.
reawakening and re-remembering to utilize that part of us so we can unify the two together. And
That's
the
right.
dogs they're already unifying to the point where they have kind of realized, in a sense, they don't need the mind. The mind is actually of less value. The more we get the dog to think, the less they're in their heart.
That's right. As we see in ourselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to share with the Mystic Dog Mama community?
Just thank you for listening to my to my ramblings with Alexia today. If you're still with us, that's so cool, and I'd love to hear from people. I really do genuinely adore working with people and their dogs, and never think that you cannot just send me a photo of your dog and go, oh my god, like this just makes me melt. Please, I want to show you this and let me tell you about my dog, because I love to hear. I love to
Yeah,
hear, and there's always that juicy bit in there that the Sacred Canine Heart are like, share that with the Guardian, reply and say that.
absolutely. So I will share how people can get in touch with you in the show
Yeah.
notes, so they can definitely do that. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, we've kind of talked about this throughout, but I wondered if there was a specific element of this you might want to reflect upon. I ask all of my guests at the very end about it's not a trick question, don't worry, but the
Did I look worried?
you looked a little bit worried there. No, it's okay. But I wonder what dogs, whether it's your own dogs or the dogs you've worked with through Canine Flow, through all of the various things that you've done with dogs, or even just Fusa herself, what have dogs taught you about what it means to be human?
Yeah, so they've taught me that humans are way more empowered than we've come to be in this culture and society, that we do have the ability to create our reality, and we do have the ability to make shifts in our realities. And it's really by recognizing our heart based aspects of ourselves that really pulls ourselves into those empowerments, and not because it is all about the heart, but because we unify, and then by unifying we can access our soul more deeply. So the heart has its one way of being, and the mind has another way of being. And when those are in alignment, that's where we really access our soul. For me, that's what dogs have sort of led me to see, that there's this other way of being, and we don't need to be in the mind-based side of things.
Oh, you were amazing. Thank you so, so much for joining me today. This has just been such a delight. I absolutely love talking with you and being in your energy with you and just learning more each and every time we talk about this around exactly as you're saying, like how do we drop more fully into our hearts so that we can be more fully ourselves and who we were here to show up as. It's such a gift. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Isn't Caroline wonderful? Before I close out this episode, I wanted to leave you with a few tips that I have used as someone who has taken the Canine Flow course and is applying the learnings to my relationship with Lucky, so that you can start applying this perspective to your dog today. I'll be diving deeper into this in a separate episode, but I wanted to give you some easy things that you can start right now. I found that the first thing that has been really helpful is to learn to see and feel differently. And what I mean by that is that I, like many of you, am used to looking at Lucky's behavior through a mind-based lens. I can see that he barks and lunges at dogs passing by the gate or on the walk, and I've labeled these things as triggers, which they are, but I've started getting a bit more nuanced. So, for example, what was going on before the reaction? Is it every dog? Is it always on a walk? Is it always at a particular distance? How was I feeling just before it happened? I also start to take stock of all the different stimuli that he's experiencing that would be leading to that emotional charge building and what that looks like in his body. So, for example, is he more stiff? Is he walking more quickly with his tail slightly tucked? Is he running over to me to jump up at me? How was he before we even left the house? Did he hear cats or motorcycles? Even if he didn't react, he probably did notice them. That can add to the charge that he experiences on the walk. I've just started noticing more. I recommend that you begin by looking a bit more deeply and just differently at your dog. I've also started to pay more specific attention to the different ways that Lucky tends to ground his emotional charge, and also to the times that I don't allow him to do it. Lucky loves to press up against me or jump up and put his front paws on me, whether that's at home or out on the walk. He loves to sniff. He loves to mouth my hand or toys, and he loves to dig. I'm also paying more attention now to when I tend to be pulling him on the leash or when I'm stopping him from sniffing or barking. There are obviously times that I have to do that, but I'm also conscious now that I need to let him release that charge somehow, whether that's giving him a toy to put his mouth on, or if it's safe, allowing him to go sniff where the dog was that he just barked at. I'm getting more and more conscious of when he needs to ground and how I can apply appropriate ways for him to complete that circuit, either in the moment or shortly thereafter. The third and final thing I want to share with you in this episode, and like I said, I'll be doing a separate episode dedicated to my learnings and how you can apply them to your dog, is that I'm so much more aware of my own energy around Lucky. If you've got a dog that is overwhelmed by their environment at times, I am sure you can relate to becoming much more vigilant and anxious yourself when you're out and about with your dog. I make sure that I ground my energy too, on a regular basis, not just when we're out. I personally practice Reiki. I go out in the yard with bare feet and consciously connect to the ground, or I put my hands on a tree. I focus on my breath, and when we're out and I see a trigger, I specifically focus on my breath and communicate with Lucky that he is safe and I'm taking him away from the thing that is scaring him. All of these things have been really helpful for me and Lucky. There wasn't an overnight change, except possibly with the hypnosis and taking him to the vet. But as I'll share in the episode I'm creating on Lucky's journey, there has been incredible growth that I honestly never thought I would see. And it wasn't until I started focusing on energy and using that in tandem with other forms of training that it finally started to happen. So I'm hoping that in sharing our story with you, it offers you some hope and gives you some specific things that you can be trying as you deepen your relationship with your pup. If you're interested in learning more about Canine Flow and Caroline's upcoming course, as well as her Sacred Canine Heart Oracle cards, you can visit her website, canineflow.com. I've left a link in the show notes too. I'm not sponsored by Canine Flow, just so you know. I just found it so valuable that I wanted to share it with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'd love to hear from you what your biggest takeaway was. And as always, if you have any questions or if there are any topics you'd like me to address in future episodes, please reach out to me. I can't tell you how much I enjoy hearing from you and connecting with you. It truly makes my day. You can reach me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. Okay, until next time.